Welcome to Films and Stuff with your hosts, Pete Mitchell and Ethan Hunt.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Films and Stuff. I'm Ethan. I'm joined by Pete. Hey, Pete.
How you doing?
Everything is great today. What's new?
What's new? Not much. We've got our usual stream or skip. And for our regular listeners, you know what the deal is. But for our new listeners, Ethan has given me a list of TV shows he'd like me to watch. I've given Ethan a list of TV shows I'd like him to watch. We randomly select a TV show every week, watch at least 2 episodes, and then on that basis, determine if that show is indeed worthy of being streamed or skipped.
That's right. You want to kick it off, Pete? What do you have this week? What's your assignment?
This week, I had Apple TV's Liaison.
Oh, French drama, right?
So
is it
that's
French
right.
drama or French action spy thriller? What is it?
I had maybe heard of this in the back of my mind, but it had slipped my mind in that time. But you actually told me last week that it was an espionage show, supposed to be like a high-flying thriller.
Right.
So I was very excited by that because realistically, we've only seen Slow Horses on Apple TV, and Slow Horses is excellent, but it's a little slower paced, and it seems more low stakes because it's really UK focused, and even then more specifically London focused.
Yeah.
That's not to say it's not high stakes. Of course, people do die. There are things there. So I'm just saying in this grand scheme of things. So I got onto Liaison and I watched it, and a couple things stood out to me. First of all, a lot of the show is in French, even though it's a French production, and I think it's a French co-production with the UK. So there's a lot of English spoken, but they're very faithful to the language. So the show hops around many different locations, and they follow the language of where they are. So in England, most of the people are speaking English. In France, everybody's speaking French. So let's start with the premise. The premise is that you've got 2 Arab kids who have hacked into a government database, stolen some data, and are now on the run. And they're on the run because they're trying to sell that data because they want to escape to where they are. I think it's Syria.
Yep.
And they've decided that they want to, sell that information and make a new life for themselves. The French government has decided that they're going to help them, and things go awry almost immediately. We learn that the French government has a couple different factions working for them, and we learn that the British are somehow involved. This is one of the few shows that's taken Brexit and added that as a very important plot element.
You're right.
And it's done it in a very politically neutral way, which I really liked because, you don't want to have the baggage of politics on your TV show. Prima facie, when you watch this show, you're going to see that there's a lot of stereotypes and cliches and tropes. You see a Brexit minister who hates Europe and thinks of the Europeans as enemies. You see a French politician who's having an affair and has a child out of wedlock. You see these French womanizers. You see all of these classical cliches and tropes. And I have to say, this is one of the rare times where I watched 2 episodes and I wrote my review and I sent it across to you like I always do every week. And I said, you know what, Ethan, this is a mooch. It's fine, but I think Slow Horses is much better. And then something unbelievable happened. I had a few extra hours. I watched the 3rd episode just because it was a mooch. It wasn't a bad show. I said, okay, I'll watch the 3rd episode. I sat down, watched the 3rd episode, and I'm telling you, by the end of the 3rd episode, I was all in. I immediately went back, deleted my review, changed it around, and made it a must subscribe.
He wrote back to me breathless, I changed my grade. We've never had that before. We've never had a a great reversal, have we?
Yeah, well, certainly not after already,
Yeah.
deciding. Because the show has excellent production values. It looks very high end. It looks like it could be a movie. The languages are spot on. It's definitely an international thriller when you think about it, not just between France and the UK, but we see some scenes in other parts of the world as well. But the plot was, I think it was more cliche than it was interesting for the first two episodes. And I'm glad I watched the third, because when the plot kind of clears up a little bit and you kind of understand what's happening and you understand the stakes of what's involved, it's hard to stop watching. It's very good.
So this is about ultimately cybercrime, right?
Yes, it is.
And cyber attacks that are being carried out, I guess, primarily against the UK, right?
Yes, that's right. And we don't know why yet, and I don't want to spoil it for our listeners, even though, we're quite notorious for spoiling things on here. But in general, the premise is that those kids are now also being blamed for the hacking attacks that are happening in the UK. And so everyone's trying to figure out where they are, who's behind the hacks, what exactly is happening. It actually gets quite tense. And there's a lot of elements because especially in the first two episodes, you realize that, oh man, like the world isn't this small. Not everybody knows everyone, and everyone's plot threads are interconnected. And you were just I was just getting a bit like, how is it possible? But then you think about it a little bit more and you kind of overlook that and you're like, yeah, it's not maybe the most realistic thing, but it's kind of adding a lot of degrees of intrigue and drama and suspense to this, so much so that I don't mind it.
What do you think of the cast?
Great point. Excellent. Superb. Yeah. First of all, it stars Eva Green.
Yep.
Unbelievable. I really have liked her for a long time. She's quite possibly my favorite Bond lady.
Oh, wow. Casino Royale.
Casino Royale, that's right. I didn't know this until I watched the show, but I found out she's actually French. I always thought she was British, but she's actually French.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And then on the counter side, the male star is Vincent Cassel.
Oh, yeah. Now, timeless.
Right. Very, very, very good actor, very handsome, very everything. I have my doubts as to how many people would know that name. I think most people would recognize him, but he is a prolific actor in Europe, certainly.
I mean, he was in Westworld. We remember him from Westworld, right?
He was in Westworld. Maybe more culturally familiar to people would be that he was the antagonist in Ocean's 12.
He also had a huge fight scene with Jason Bourne.
He also had a huge fight scene with Jason Bourne. Exactly. So he's taken these roles where...
Yeah, but I agree. He's mostly known for French action.
Yeah, and I think he's also taken these roles that I think most... And I hesitate to use this word, but I think most of, the Western audience, and by Western, I really mean North American audience, might not recognize him. But if they do, if they start thinking about it, you'll notice that his work is actually quite prolific.
Yeah.
He's very good. What's interesting is I thought I would be more interested in seeing Eva Green because, she's not just good, she's beautiful. But it's actually Vincent Cassel that's making me want to watch more and more.
Yeah.
So yeah, it looks like it could be a thrilling ending is what I said. And I know for a fact that it's going to be a thrill.
How many episodes in the season?
My understanding is there are only 6 episodes and 5 have already been released. And it comes out on Fridays. It's short. Again, a good thing. And I think because I don't think this could have been sustained over a whole 10, 12 episodes. It's also one of the rare streamer skip episodes, which is actually current. Normally we watch things that are more in the backlog or in the library of a streamer, but this is one of the few current shows that we have. And I highly recommend it to our listeners. It started off slow, I will admit that. And having said that, it's actually probably worked in its favor that it started off slow because this is kind of almost like an underrated or like a slow burn show.
Yeah.
And even though it's only 6 episodes, it took its time setting up a few things. And it was it was a good thing they did that.
So this is on Apple TV Plus, but did they actually produce this or they bought it from, a French production company that
I have a sneaking suspicion that they bought it.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that they did or that they didn't. I have a sneaking suspicion that they did, only because at this earliest stage, I'm skeptical that Apple would spend money on content creation in a majority foreign language.
Should we talk about Apple and their big splash this week then? Or should we not go off on our tangent?
No, why not? Why not? Well, we can limit it to Apple, but I think it's funny because last week we spoke about what was very unique about Apple was that they were very, let's say, frugal.
Yeah.
They were being very efficient with their use of money, that most of their stuff seemed relatively cheap, but was very high quality.
Yep. They must have been listening.
Yeah, maybe they took offense.
They issued a press release the next day saying, hey, we're going to spend $1 billion a year on films to break into cinemas. That's the headline. Like, what? That's 4 or 5 movies at least, right?
That's 4 or 5 blockbusters. If you think about that, I think realistically you're looking at anywhere from 10 to 15 movies on average. That's a lot of money. And I'm not saying they can't do it. Don't get me wrong, because other studios are doing it. But that seems like a lot of money for a tech company to be putting into content creation. And of course, really, Amazon's the only comparable we have. And their track record has been spotty at best.
Can I give you like a vision of how I would see this working? Because I agree, this doesn't make any sense to me at all, which is the cinema game is potentially lucrative, but it's really hard to make a lot of money. And the amount of money that Apple makes in tech dwarfs the amount of money that they can make from a good release, right?
Yeah.
So, and the benefit of Apple, if you're an investor, is that, it's recurring revenue. There's no ups, there's no downs, there's no, is this going to be popular? Is it not going to be popular? You actually don't want that volatility in your Apple stock, right? They are a tech company. What if they would approach this differently? And if they're going to do like a cinematic release, what if there's like Apple Cinemas? And it's just kind of like this immersive, kind of like second screen digital experience where they're showing their own content, So for example, at the Apple Store, they've got like these mini, cinemas, and in the cinemas, they're using Apple projectors and what's the Beats, right? Speakers, or you put Beats headphones on, like on your iPhone or iPad, there's like kind of like the Amazon X-ray where you can see like different information about the scene or the actor in real time. What if it's just this boutique-y thing and they release, one of these a month, and that's kind of their draw to get into the Apple Store? You're like, hey, if you buy a new phone, you get a ticket for the film. If you buy a ticket for the film, you can loiter in the store for like 10 minutes. If this was what Apple's plan was, I'd think that this would be like a super good way to like drive people to their stores and drive people to like buy devices. If they're just going to say, go to your local AMC or Vox, or what do you have in London?
Odeon or a View, yeah.
I just don't see where the benefit is for them to release something in Odeon,
I would suggest that that's probably a good idea, but that doesn't require $1 billion a year in content spend.
Yeah.
And moreover, it would require the push into that type of consumer electronics, which they haven't done. If we heard industry reports saying that Apple is planning on building and selling a home cinema projector, they don't even do TVs, right? They do that one ridiculously expensive monitor, and that's it. If you told me that they want to get into televisions, that they want to get into home projectors, and that they want to expand the Beats and their Apple Music library to include cinema speakers and so forth, and that they basically wanted to, this is almost like vertical integration in that regard, right? Which is to say that let's build the product first and then build the market after. In this case, maybe they're building the market first and then the products after. That could also be the case. That's fine. But I think the point you started off with is the most important thing, which is that is not their forte. They are a fashion technology company. If I'm an Apple shareholder, I know that, like clockwork, every 12 months, a new iPhone is coming out, even if it looks exactly the same, but an iPhone with a new number is coming out.
Mhm.
I know that every 18 to 24 months, a new MacBook is coming out. And I know that every 8 to 12 months, there's an incremental increase in some of our other minor techs, such as our AirPods or, whatever accessories that we've got. And I know that that's generating me $1 billion of profit a day or whatever the actual number is, right? I can't remember off the top of my head. I'm not going to want to rock the boat. And I certainly wouldn't be happy if my CEO turns around and says, we've conquered tech, let's move into cinema. Cinema, as you rightly said, is a notoriously expensive and not profitable business.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm not sure what's being driven here. You're right when you say that Apple doesn't really focus on speakers and projectors and televisions. Then maybe if you would shift that to like some type of like, I don't know, like the Oculus.
Yeah, like
type
a wearable.
products,
I was thinking exactly the
like
same. Yeah.
maybe if it's like that and they say, hey, we think it's gonna be hard for people to buy, or it's difficult for people to buy this because there's not a lot of market. So all the films we're going to make are going to be immersive experiences. Everything we're going to do is going to be immersive because we're driving the content that's going to, have people want to buy these wearables. Then maybe that makes a little bit more sense. I mean, I'm excited for Apple to get into films, of course. I mean, we want more films, we want more content, good or bad. It's somehow good for us, but as a business case, I'm not sure really what the justification is. I mean, yes, Apple has an extra $1 billion lying around, which is a huge sum of money. But for Apple, I mean, they do have it.
Yeah.
But by the same token, it's not really moving the needle for them, right? Even if they make 5 movies, all 5 movies, dramatically exceed expectations.
Even if they triple their money, $3 billion a year is nothing for Apple because they're making like 50 times that on their tech. The problem is that the risks far outweigh the benefits because if it's a flop, Apple also notoriously doesn't want to be associated with anything that they would consider like a bad mark against their reputation.
Yeah. Do you think there's going to be like insane product placement? Like everybody's going to have to be using an iPhone,
but
right?
We've seen that already, right? If you look at most of the Apple produced TV series where it makes sense, they always have an Apple product.
Yeah.
There's no way around that. Look, I think what Apple is doing is similar to what Netflix did, but the problem is they're doing it too early. When Netflix was just making TV series, it was getting to a point where they started getting critical acclaim for their TV series. So remember, we had
Orange is the New Black, House of Cards.
Exactly. And they were starting to win awards for that. They were well established as a streaming platform. And that's when they decided to say, hey, we should get into the movie business as well. If we're spending so much money to make these critically acclaimed TV series, we should do the same to make the movies. I mean, in my opinion, that hasn't necessarily worked out for them.
It has not.
But Apple hasn't gotten to it yet. For one, they are not a mainstream platform. For all the pomp and circumstance around Apple and all the glitz and glamour, not everybody has an Apple TV Plus account. In fact, I would say that they're at maybe 10% of what Netflix is, maybe 15% of what Netflix is at best in terms of scale.
May I say, on our behalf, with our year-end review, Apple TV Plus is very good value for money. I think it's only $6.99, and the quality of the content is very, very good. But again, as you mentioned before Liaison, we had things like Blackbird, we had things like Slow Horses, like everything was very centralized, neighborhood kind of based stories.
Yeah.
Even like The Shrink Next Door, right? I mean, that was always set in New York or upstate New York or something, right?
Shrinking, set in Pasadena.
Set in Pasadena and basically occurs between, like an office, a backyard, and something else. Whereas Liaison, as you mentioned, is the first time there's kind of like multiple different countries involved, different footage of the dam, the train station, the refugee camp in Syria or wherever it is, so.
Look, I'm not going to criticize. I'm not going to say it's a good idea or a bad idea. I just question the timing. I think that if you could say you had 50 million or 75 million subscribers, it starts to make sense because you do need to feed them content. And for them to do that at 20, 30 million subscribers, not insignificant, don't get me wrong, but even at 30 million subscribers, you're looking at like $200 million a month. So you're looking at maybe $2 billion a year pre-cost. It's hard to spend 50% of that pre-cost of your revenues just on content. My concern is they're going to start following the Netflix model to such an extent that they're going to start pumping out content that's kind of nonsense as well. Like, because, I mean, we've talked about it a lot, but like Netflix maybe is releasing 10 shows a week. But of those 10 shows, of the 30 or 40 shows that they're releasing a month, maybe 2 are worth watching. Maybe 1 is worth watching.
You're absolutely onto something, and we're going to get to that with my streamer skip this week. But I have to say, it is really something that has changed dramatically over the last 2 to 3 years for Netflix, which used to be a go-to hub for film and television entertainment. And now I could scroll through.
I'm looking at my recently added list. There's something called Cheat. There's the Waco American Apocalypse, Murdoch Murders. None of these things sound good. Fall, Johnny, The Clovage Killer, The Unholy.
I mean, when I go to award-winning TV shows, I see Arrested Development, which is amazing. If someone hasn't seen Arrested Development, that's 10 years old. House of Cards, 10 years old. The Amazing Race, very old. Orange is the New Black, How to Get Away with Murder. All these are amazing shows. I mean, these are all super, super old shows. Yes, they're good, but like they're old. Where's the new stuff? And when I say new releases, I see The Night Agent. I see Waco, Love is Blind. Yes, those murders, Dance 100, Invisible City, ICU, Sky High. None of these, it's like they're just created by like an algorithm. They say, hey, we need this type of, action thriller. Let's put it together. None of them look interesting to me.
So let's segue into your show.
That's our streaming skip for Liaison plus some unsolicited commentary. You're welcome. Now, the other streamer skip assignment we had this week was on Netflix. It was called The Human Playground, narrated by Idris Elba, who is an amazing voice. So The Human Playground, you had very high hopes for it, Pete, because it is somewhat sports-based. And it is, I'd say, something of an anthology where it examines themes of pain, perseverance, ancient rituals, bravery, skill, strength, things like that in different cultures or in different settings. So there are 6 episodes, I guess, so far. I've watched about half of them. They're all very, very well done in terms of production. Idris Elba is an amazing narrator, but they hop around a little bit for me. So for example, they will talk about a marathon in the desert. They'll talk about bullfighting. They'll talk about hunting traditions. They'll talk about cliff diving. All of these are maybe like half an episode. There's one on sumo wrestling. There's one on reindeer racing. There's one on bodybuilding. There's one on race car driving. They're all very well done, but they're a little bit too short for me. That I think that each of these could either be almost like multiple episodes based on one particular person, and the trials, the tribulations that they go through in the preparation, in the competing of this, maybe even why they decided to get into it, why it matters. Or it could go into kind of like the sport or event itself and talk a little bit more about the preparation, the number of participants, the attrition rate, injuries, the preparation, the type of admiration you get locally or globally for being successful at this. I think there's a lot of really interesting elements to a lot of sports that are overlooked. This race in Moroccan desert is an amazing race. And Pete, you and I have a mutual friend who competed in it. I'd love to get into the granular details of the preparation, of the equipment, of what you pack in your backpack. You have to pack all your own food, all your own survival gear. I'd be fascinated to see someone like just packing and like weighing their equipment and making decisions like, should I pack more energy bars or like an extra pair of socks? Or should I do both? And then I'm going to have this many kgs to carry. I'd be fascinated to see like how they eat when they get to the camp at night. You know, how just all the details I thought is great. The same thing with cliff diving, you know, like how they identify these cliffs, you know, how they prepare, how they do all the testing. Any number of these things I think would be more interesting, but I felt like these episodes went a little bit too fast, gave me a very superficial overview of the sport, a very superficial overview of the participant. And instead of letting me really understand this person and, you know, their involvement in this or their pursuit of this, I felt like I was just kind of given this very brief summary and then they moved on to the next one. So I left feeling a little bit unsatisfied, and not in the way that like I craved more, but in the way that I wasn't able to really like establish a rhythm or get emotionally involved because it was just moving too fast and not focused enough on kind of the details that I wanted to see. So I gave this a skip. Sometimes I gladly mark a show with a skip. I say just avoid. And this one I felt a little bit bad about because I really wanted it to be successful. And I think you wanted the same thing because you were pretty excited about this for me when you chose it. But it really didn't hit the mark. It's done a little bit of a documentary way with Idris Elba, which I think that format works. But I don't think that they had a deep enough dive or more compelling enough stories that, you know, really were able to kind of keep my attention and captivate me. So I gave Human Playground on Netflix a skip.
Oh, that's a shame. Really, I was hoping that it would be a documentary series that focused on maybe a little bit more in depth on what you're saying. I thought that each episode was going to be like an hour long or whatever it was going to be, and focused on something not so, I mean, I know it's not generic, but a little bit more deep divey, if you will.
Yeah.
But it's a shame that that's not the case.
And it goes back to our comment earlier. I mean, on Netflix, which I feel this is a good example. I mean, now I'm going to be picking, you know, hindsight is 2020, right? But Netflix almost was a little bit too ambitious with this, you know, trying to cram in, you know, 3 or 4 different sports or stories into an episode is a little bit ambitious. Maybe there could have been like a little bit more of it. Like, okay, let's go around the world, you know, like let's start east to west. Let's go to every continent. Let's choose 2 sports that are a little bit like underrated. Like, I just felt like we were kind of like hopping all over the place, you know, and unnecessarily so. It would have been better if there was like you know, today I'm in South Africa and I'm here to focus on this. I'm in Japan, I'm focusing on sumo. Now I'm in Russia, I'm focused on, I don't know, ice
Bear
fishing.
hunting
I'm
or
making
whatever,
this up, right? Yeah. Like if it would have been like a trek, right? And you could kind of like, there's an overview, like the little footsteps or the dotted lines on the map, then I think I would have been like a little bit more interested. But here it just seemed like they just threw random things together, you know, like bullfighting, Spain, Marathon des Sables in Morocco. They're not at all related. Geographically, they're not related. You know, climate-wise, they're not related. In terms of sport, they're not related. You know, then you throw in, you know, like sumo, then you throw in cliff diving. There's just no rhyme or reason in terms of why some of these things were chosen or why they are presented in this way. So it was a good try. It's nice to see something unique. And I do admire Netflix for doing something new, but it didn't hit with me at all.
It's a shame Idris Elba couldn't salvage it, but that's fine. That's how it works.
Better luck next week, as we say.
That's right. And speaking of,
what do we have?
So, interesting tale. When we selected randomly the shows for next week, I have started taking to double checking that those shows are still available on the platforms.
Uh-oh.
Originally, you had been assigned a show called Coyote on Paramount Plus. I think it's been taken off of Paramount Plus. And articles I've read state that it was moved on to CBS All Access. So fine, I selected again, and you've got on Hulu instead, you'll be watching a show called Maggie.
Maggie?
Mm-hmm.
What's it about?
The premise is it's kind of like a romantic comedy, but not quite.
Okay.
It's about a psychic.
Okay. Maggie on Hulu.
And I'm also on Hulu, and I'll be watching A History of the World Part 2. It's a comedic take on literally the history of the world.
Huh.
That is also a current live 2023 show, so that's another rare one for us, so at least we can give you a reasonable idea.
All right. So we're both on Hulu. Let's see. We've got a big Hulu week coming ahead of us.
So that's our stream or skip for this week.
Plus some extra tangents for free.
Plus some tangents as usual. If you have any thoughts on any of the shows we've watched, or if you think there are other shows that we should be adding to our list, reach out. Email us, aloha@filmsandstuffpodcast.com. Tweet at us at F&S Podcast, or DM us on Instagram at Films and Stuff Podcast.
Yep. I'm excited for these two upcoming shows. We'll report back next week. Pete is on a little bit of a hot streak. I don't want to jinx it, but he's on a little bit of a hot streak. I think 2 weeks in a row you've had a must-subscribe now, right?
That's right.
I'm a little bit behind, but tides have been known to change quickly. So let's see where we go from here. All right, everybody. Pete, thank you. Listeners, thank you. We'll see you next week on Films and Stuff.
Thanks, Ethan. Thanks, everyone.
Bye now.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Films and Stuff. If you haven't already, please subscribe and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever podcasts are downloaded. Films and Stuff. There is no substitute.